Let's go down to Georgia. We've got Christian. He, him wants to talk about the reliability of the Gospels. Hey, Christian, you're talking with SR and Tom. What's up?
I called
Hey.
I called the Talk Even in some other place and just
great.
asking opinions about the New Testament. And I wanted to ask you guys what if you guys don't believe the New Testament is reliable, and fair enough, but what how did you come to that conclusion? What standard did you find that the New Testament didn't meet? What evidence were you looking for that it didn't satisfy? Stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Tom, where did you fall out on all this?
Oh my goodness. I guess my personal story, right, is that I was raised Catholic, and then in high school I was getting confirmed. Right. I was taking psychology and sociology and mythology. Those four things all at the same time. I'm like, oh, these three all kind of like work together for me logically. And this outsider one,
that's a combo.
A little bit, I'm treating it different, right? To accept the claims that are being put in there. So, I mean, Bart Ehrman, the scholar, biblical scholar, recently had a video on the 30,000 errors in the Bible or whatever over the years. So it's just like a lot of it just doesn't make sense.
I thought he said variance.
Variance? Yeah, whatever.
I thought he said variance.
Sure. And well, good. You're following along. So I guess how do you reason through that? I guess would be my counter question.
Oh, it's easy. It's a misleading figure. It's like, yeah, they're 30,000. But
wouldn't one be enough if you think that the Bible is like the Word of God?
Well, I can explain the Bar Ehrman part. We can get to that. The 30,000 part is saying that there are 30,000 plus like textual differences between the 6,000, or some odd Greek New Testament manuscripts or fragments of manuscripts. And that's true, but it's like, what are those variants? Like 90% of them are like changed in a word order, or it's like saying towards instead of toward.
Even if 10% are really bad, like that's still.
I wonder, and
but none of them change the theology though. Like none of them are groundbreaking or like.
Yeah, if you don't look at them critically.
Yeah, I get what you're.
No. I mean,
hang on a second, Christian. Because I get where you're going.
I want to delay
with that about the variants and stuff. Like, yeah, I grant that. Okay, writing down, TO versus TOO, it's like, okay, copied an extra letter. It's not that big of a deal. But I guess for me, it does make me wonder if like you would have to agree that like adding a letter to a word is an error in at least one sense, right? Like it's a mistake. If the word is spelled W-A-N-T, okay. So then I guess does that?
I do want to clarify. Like, I don't think that the Bible as it exists now is inerrant, because it's like, we can account for
some of it has to be true.
Differences and things.
Yeah,
I would say
some
the Bible
of it has
is
to be true,
but it's not. Okay. Yeah, the Bible's true, but the text, like we know, like, yeah, it probably was a spelling mistake or like a scribal error or something like that. It's like, I believe the autographs were probably inerrant, but like, it doesn't mean we can't possibly understand what was said.
No, I get that, and that's not where I'm going. Where I'm going is, it seems to me that you've done this thing, which honestly, I mean, I did this for a really long time myself. You've done this thing where if there is something that presents itself as a problem, right, then, it's really not that big of a deal. But all of these other things that claim to be 100% truth now, they seem to be on shakier footing, right? Because now you've got in a single, hang on just a second. In a single text now, you've got something that you grant meets the criteria for you to be a mess up of some kind, right? Even if it's tiny. But then there's that later portion of the text that you go, well, that's 100% correct. And I guess my question there is, how do you differentiate between those two?
Which is which?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. Also, I apologize if I like interrupt because I'm on a delay.
No, I'll do it too. Don't worry. It's all good. All good.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, as I said earlier with like the Barterman thing, like there are, it's well accounted for that there are lots of like textual, and it's like the word variant kind of, and I'm not trying to excuse it. So like, it like the word variant kind of has, I think, a greater weight than people, think it does, or maybe the other way around. It's like a spelling mistake or like a transliteration. Because like in Koine alone, there are like 5 million Koine words. There are like 1 million English words. So it's like, no doubt there's going to be some variations, but literally none of the variations change theology. They don't change the premise of the narrative or the meta narrative. It's like, it's not hard to understand what was said, even in the autographs. Like you can, what historians do, they just compare what was said between each manuscript and they
I get this.
Put them together.
What I'm trying to get at, Christian, is a little bit deeper than that. It's a little bit underneath that. Okay. So I get that making a word from changing the word from toward to towards does not change the whole context, really, right? It doesn't really change much about anything. Okay. But it does seem to bring up this issue. And that issue is that now the book that is in front of us, seemingly by both of our acceptances, has some problems. There's at least one spot in the whole place that we know was a mess up of some kind, no matter how small. So then the question has to be asked, how do we know that the stuff about Jesus being the Son of God and rising from the dead wasn't also a mess up, but just from older manuscripts that we don't have anymore? Like, how do you differentiate between what is true in the Bible and what isn't?
No, that's a great question. So yeah, it's like, I don't think that, and it is kind of a claim that I think a lot of Christians, like, they don't have to defend, because the Bible doesn't say the Bible is inerrant. Like, unlike the Quran, for example, it's like the Bible doesn't say the Bible is perfect.
That's fair.
And it's like, we can understand and we can acknowledge that there are like textual differences between like a word, or there's like a transliteration, stuff like that. And they don't, as I said earlier, they don't disrupt theology. But to answer your question about like, what do we know is real? It's like sorry?
I was giggling. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no, I thought no, it's all good. I thought you said something. But as I said earlier, like the textual differences between the 1,000 manuscripts are very minimal. And aside from them, they all say the exact same thing, barring these variants, basically word for word. And the meaning isn't there are manuscripts which are like, Jesus was never God, and then all the other ones said that they were. It's like they all say the exact same thing, just about in the exact same way, give or take like a toward or a towards. They don't argue on theology. They don't argue on the sonship of God and Jesus Christ. They don't,
Christian, let me jump in for a second. Maybe I can refocus us a little bit. Maybe I can refocus us a little bit.
Yeah,
okay? Sure. There is a point in the Bible. There is at least somewhere in there where it says God is like all powerful, right? You with me? You following with me so far?
There's many places, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So do you think that is true?
Most certainly.
Cool. Awesome. There's a part in the Bible where it said God is like a hen that covers its chicks with its wings. Do you think God is a hen with wings? Do you think that is true?
Well, that's where you get into textual criticism, right?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think this is the crux of the issue here, Christian. I think this is exactly the problem. So seriously, this isn't a trick or anything. Like, I'm not trying to lead you anywhere. I genuinely think this is interesting. So the thing about where it says,
I do not believe God is a chicken.
Right. Of course not. It's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor, right? Has to be.
Textual criticism.
Has to be trying to give us some understanding, right? By comparing it to other stuff. So here's the question, because this is what I was getting at. What What criteria do you use that differentiates between that first verse being true to
Right.
life, representing reality, versus that second one
Mhm.
really just being a metaphor? What
Oh,
is
okay.
the difference,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
how do you determine between the two? Because that's really important.
Okay, I see. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I think I answered the wrong question that I thought you asked. Yeah.
that's okay.
So
That's all right.
the answer to that question is no, you're good. The answer to that question, that's called hermeneutics. You know, I'm sure you've heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
It's where you take a
Hermeneutics.
text and you make an inference and you make understandings based on like context of the time, the language it's written in, the people who wrote it, right? Geopolitics, things like that. And you can I don't think it's even disputable. You can understand what's literal and what's not, right? Like
Really?
if you understand anything about Hebrew poetry, yes. Like if you understand
Okay, so
anything about
let
Hebrew
me
poetry,
hang on, because
and you
I'm
understand
following along
hermeneutics.
with you on hermeneutics. Hang on a
Okay.
second, okay?
Okay.
Oh, I
Listen
thought you
to
said hermeneutics.
no, no, no,
Herman Cain's autobiography.
no.
No.
Okay.
So
No,
if I told you that my house is a
yes.
mansion, if I said my house
hmm
is a mansion, is that literal or metaphor?
It could be either.
It could be. And what would be the criteria that you would use to determine whether it's literal or metaphor?
Good question. It
You'd
would
look.
depend on. Sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. I thought you were going to say. Go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead. Oh,
Yeah. I thought someone else said something. It would depend on. So is it descriptive or is it prescriptive? Is it following some type of metaphorical style or poetic
how do
style
you
of the
know if it's
language, which
following a
is
metaphorical or poetic
contemporaneous with the
style?
time period?
There's something
Well,
underneath
as
what you're getting at. How
I
do you
just said it.
determine if it's
It's like
metaphoric style?
I just said it. Yeah, you can understand. You can get a good grip on it based on other
How?
writings of the period, and you can compare.
But how? If all of the writings say SR's house is a mansion, how do you deter? Let me posit something to you, and you tell me if I'm off base on this, okay? If I said to
No problem.
you, my house is a mansion, and then I took a picture
hmm
of my house and I showed it to you, and my house was
hmm
actually a double wide trailer. The reason that you
Yes.
would then say, oh, when SR said his house is a mansion, that's metaphor. The reason that the criteria would be that the words that I used do not correspond to the reality around us, right? That would be the one
Yeah, in that
distinguishing
situation,
factor.
right?
That's the
In
distinguishing
that
factor
situation, right? When it
always.
comes
That
to,
is always the case.
but let me say this: when you don't know, like let's say if you say your house is a mansion and I don't have a photo in front of me, I have to use indirect means, which is called hermeneutics, to understand. And as I was answering your question, when it comes to like let's say like Hebrew poetry or Semitic poetry or whatever, you can get a grasp on things like idioms and literary
But
devices
how?
by analyzing how are they used. I'm about to answer by how they're used in other cultures outside of the text itself,
But
which is done
I
all the
think you're
time.
running into the same problem, Christian, because what you're saying is it's circular right now. You're saying they're metaphors because we know they're metaphors because we know they're metaphors. But what is actually happening is you see an idiom in the old Hebrew, and then you find that same
hmm
idiom in another text written by some other completely different language, some other completely different group. And then you
hmm
realize that what they're talking about, see, they said the camel floated to the tops of the heavens. And you realize that camels don't float. And because camels
Yeah,
don't float in the real world around us, most likely what they're saying is not literal. Most likely what they're saying is a
sure.
metaphor. At the end of the day, what you're actually using to determine whether or not something in the Bible is literal or metaphor is the same thing that we use when it comes to truth, that which corresponds to reality. And so that's the problem. That's the issue.
Well, it's
Is that?
not. Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, yeah, that's partly true. It's like, its adherence to reality is definitely like a factor, but you have to understand when it comes to, like, let's say we're talking about, the Bible has tons of different types of literature in it, but we'll just focus on poetry, right? If it has poetry, you can appeal to something outside of the Bible, and that's why it's not circular reasoning, because you can make an inference by something that's outside of the text itself. And that can form a pretty concise case as to, yeah, this is probably like a good example. A good example would be, and I will unfortunately use the Bible to prove the Bible, but they're hundreds of years apart.
You just say this isn't circular reasoning. That's what kind of perked my ears up.
Well, bear with me now. Bear with me.
I'm bearing with you. Here we go.
We'll give you. Hang on.
The idiom 3 days and 3 nights. You know, you're familiar with that?
Sure.
Right?
No, for the folks at home.
Sorry?
For the folks at home, what's the idiom of 3 days and 3 nights?
The idiom of 3 days and 3 nights was used in all 4 of the Gospels. And what people mistakenly sometimes think, because sometimes they're like, oh, well, Jesus was talking about Jonah in the belly of the whale for 3 days, whatever. Sometimes they think that it's 3 full days and 3 full nights, when in fact, no, it's an idiom. It's just like in the same way as saying, oh, how many days did you work this week? Like, oh, I worked 2. It's like, you probably didn't work 2 full days without sleeping, right? It's an idiom. It's a figure of speech. That same language is used as used in the 4 Gospels, is also used in the book of Esther, which historians know is hundreds of years before any gospel, right? And that's just.
All right, hold on. I got caught up in a moment because of
poetry.
What you're
or an idiom, sorry.
But does it like, are we literally talking about a man in the stomach of a whale? Or is that what you're saying? It was a metaphor.
My personal opinion?
Yeah.
Well, what I was talking about was, and it's an objection I've heard a few times, where there's a passage in, I forgot which gospel, but it's like Jesus saying, just like how Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be.
Yeah.
You've heard of that?
Yeah, he does that.
And sometimes people, yeah, I bet. And sometimes people, because they maybe don't know the context of like textual criticism, blah, 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 they think it's 3 full days and 3 full nights. And they come back.
Was it any of those? Was it any of those?
Yeah, I think that with this particular reference that you're bringing up, Christian, I just don't feel like the 3 days, 3 nights thing it would be as powerful. I would focus on the being in the belly of a fish thing being a metaphor. But then the question still arises, and we haven't gotten any good answer other than, well, we see other places in the Bible that we also say are metaphor, right? Just because the same metaphor is used. Hang on just a second. Hang on. You mentioned that, for instance, 3 days, 3 nights is repeated in Esther. And there are other places that certain idioms or metaphors are repeated throughout the Bible. Kind of makes sense, building off of one religion to make another. Kind of makes sense that they would be there. But the question at the end of the day, the foundational problem is you are using the same method for determining whether it's a metaphor or whether it's literal that I do. But the issue is that when it comes to those things that you say are literal, despite them not corresponding to reality, you say, but they are literal. And you would have to, right? Unless you believe that the Bible is completely...
I guess you're talking about the resurrection.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's certain things in the Bible that have to be actual 100% literal truth.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Right.
No doubt.
So the problem though is that
your question is, how do we know that's literal and not other stuff?
Well, right. It's the same question I've been asking, because I think at the end of the day, we use the same method, but the problem is just the consistency of applying that. So I say the reason that I know it's a metaphor when it talks about God being a chicken is because The vast majority of people who talk about their conception of God don't do that. They don't say it's a chicken. And
Right.
that's the reality around us. Just like when I see in the Bible that it says a global flood, I know that that's not possible due to a lot of problems.
Probably
So
talking
it's
about a local flood.
probably a metaphor, probably just trying to tell a story, get it out in a cool way. But if that's the criteria that we use to determine metaphor in this instance,
Oh man.
when we use that in other instances, we arrive at the same problems. That resurrection of a human being doesn't actually correspond to the world around us, but it could be a metaphor, a perfectly wonderful metaphor about
Could I
being
raise?
nice to each other.
Yeah.
Go
Can I
ahead,
raise
please.
a contention to that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
So, yeah. So with the, the question of like, how do we know that Jesus saying, I'm going to rise in 3 days, and yes, I am the Son of God. How do we know that's a metaphor? We can come to, in my opinion, you take me up, you correct me wrong, wrong. We can come to I think, pretty sure, consensus that he probably meant it literally because the first century Jews killed him because he claimed to be the Messiah, and not like traditional messianic claimant type thing, like the warrior king, but like I'm actually God and I'm actually going to be resurrected. They literally killed him because he was saying he was God. So they didn't think that it was a metaphor, or else they wouldn't have killed him.
I'll grant you, let's say, I'll grant you a bunch of toys here. Okay. One, Jesus probably was a real person. He probably did run around in the time period in the area saying many of the things he said. Totally cool with that. And
I'm glad you think that, because some people don't.
Well, that's a totally different story. It doesn't. Yeah, I think that's a whole different conversation.
I don't think you're gonna like the rest of it, but good start.
Yeah. So the next thing,
maybe
though,
not. We'll see.
I definitely, I'll give it to you. I fully think Jesus believed literally, Son of God, gonna raise from the dead. Here's where it gets interesting, though. How do we know that stuff? How do we know that stuff? What are you using? What is the criteria to determine that it is actually literal? He may have believed it, just like my buddy literally believes there are 7 species of aliens that have been cataloged and studied. So, like, how do I know that that's real, or just fancy words that are used to get a point across? Does that make sense? Like, I think Jesus probably believes the stuff he was saying, and I think his followers probably did too, but that doesn't mean that it's not a metaphor just because people sincerely believe stuff.
Okay, yeah, I see. And I do want to bring up, like, just because, and I'll grant you that Jesus spoke metaphorically all the time, and he said it himself, right?
Mm-hmm. Purposefully spoken metaphors.
Just because, thank you. Just because it's a metaphor, it doesn't mean that there's not truth behind it. And I would say that's like literally all of Jesus' metaphors. All of them have truth behind it. They just are. And he said it in the Gospels, like, I forgot the exact verbiage, but, he said he has to, speak in parables because, well, it was for the fulfillment of prophecy, but that's a different subject. But he spoke in parables because it would help make things more digestible and more palatable. It didn't mean that they were any less true. It just meant that he was condensing, information where it's less necessary to be completely literal.
Totally following along with you,
you're
Christian.
About to say something?
Totally on board with you for like pretty much everything you just said. But here's the problem, is that in certain instances in the Bible, right? We grant there are some that are metaphors. We grant there are some that are literal. In certain instances in the Bible, the most important part has to be literal. It has to be.
Yes, definitely.
Right. And so the problem that we run into there is not, hey, maybe he's using a metaphor, but there's truth behind it, right? Either Jesus Christ died on the cross to forgive the sins and transgressions of humans and then rose again and sat by God's side, or he didn't. That's the most, so we could have it as a metaphor and say,
either
yes, but the issue you see is that if you are truly going to say, hey, like Jesus Christ, Son of God, I believe, forgiveness of sins and stuff,
right.
the parts
Right.
of that understanding that have to be literal are the biggest problematic parts. And even if you say that the whole narrative is a metaphor, those specific pieces in the metaphor just flat out seem to not correspond to reality. We have never seen a
I don't
single
believe
person rise
the whole
from the
part is a
dead.
metaphor, but
Say again?
yeah. I thought I don't believe the entire Gospels are completely a metaphor. It's
right,
a mix of multiple types of literature. But yeah,
right. But
and I'll answer your question when you're done.
No, go ahead, please. I've talked a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So, you know, I see where you're coming from. Where it's like, yes, either Jesus arose from the dead or he didn't, and we're all doomed. And you're, taking that and you're kind of transpositioning that to either it was a metaphor, right, or it was not, and he was actually being super serious about it. What I'm saying is that's kind of, I think, a false dichotomy, because it's like there,
right. I'm not making that dichotomy.
I'm just making sure, like whether Jesus was the Son of God or not, that is like definitely kind of like a law exclude the middle type thing. Like he can't be neither or both, right?
Sure.
But something can be. Jesus can say something metaphorically, and it's still 100% true, which he often did.
I don't know how that works.
And you're going to
hang on. Yeah.
Well, no, I can explain that.
Hey, well, give me a second here. Give me a second here. Because didn't we agree earlier that one of the criteria in determining that a statement is a metaphor is the fact that it doesn't correspond to reality in certain specific ways, right?
Well,
didn't we agree on that?
I agreed with that instance with the floating camels and stuff like that. But that's also making the presupposition that we know everything about reality, right?
No, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Can't change.
No. It incorporates that. It incorporates that entirely, because what I'm saying is that all of the current available evidence leads us to accepting this claim that camels just don't float. We've never freaking seen it. It doesn't mean that it's categorically impossible, but we have no reason to accept it right now. Thus, when we hear somebody say, my camel floated to the top of the hill, we assume, hey, that's a metaphor because camels don't float. So it is the specific lack of correspondence to the reality around us that is the criteria for determining a metaphor. And so how then could somebody speak entirely in metaphors and be literally true? Does that make sense? There's a contradiction there.
It makes. I'm picking up where you're putting down. But I do have to say this. I agree with that instance in the camel part, because like how much something can adhere to reality, I think it plays a part in most metaphors, and it definitely can help us understand most. I'm not gonna say like it's useless, but what I brought up, you brought up the adherence to reality part. What I brought up was understanding the cultural context. So I can't say it's a contradiction to say Jesus was speaking in a metaphorical sense, but was saying something 100% true, because I said one of my criteria for understanding hermeneutics, which most historians use all the time, is understanding the historical context. And it's not just, is it something that we can empirically understand and it always happens and it never doesn't happen, right? It's like, that's not, hermeneutics probably entails part of that, but it's mostly about textual criticism, understanding the historical context, understanding different types of literature, inside and outside of the text. And, it's like, if they're not mutually exclusive, Jesus can say, something about his godhood, right? Or his, godhood and personhood. And he can say it in a different way than just saying, I am God.
Yeah.
And it's still true if he is the Son of God, right?
But then it's not a metaphor.
Mutually exclusive.
But hang on, Christian, can I do something with you real quick? I'm just going to put you on mute for literally like 30 seconds as I rattle off some of these announcements because I've just been so far behind, but I want to keep this conversation going because it's really good. Okay. I'll do this real quick. I swear.
Yeah.
Awesome. Because I have to let you guys know a couple of things. One, if you're not a patron yet, you still got time. The show isn't over and we are going to be announcing. So get that in. But also, we've got a limited edition t-shirt. This t-shirt, you guys know, tiny.cc/merch ACA. You can get all the greatest, coolest stuff right there. Question your beliefs. Truth has nothing to fear from inquiry. So tiny.cc/merch ACA. And finally, I want to send a real quick, big freaking thank you to the amazing crew who gets this going every single week. They put up with my crap. They put up with Tom's crap, and they keep coming back. And honestly, it's the cat. It's the cat that does it all. Greg's just there for eye candy. He knows it. And real quick, and we will get right back to Christian. If you happen to be in the Austin area next week on June 25th of 2023, why not join us for the live broadcast of Talk Heathen in the Atheist Experience? Talk Heathen will be hosted by Objectively Dan and Jamie the Blind Limey, and the Atheist Experience will be hosted by Christy Powell and Jimmy Jr. Doors open at noon, so freaking get there, y'all. Yeah, do that. Do it. We hope to see you there. It'll be a good time. All right,
You
Christian.
better be there.
That's right. We're bringing you back on. Tom, was there anything you wanted to respond to real quick before
I'd like to hear from Tom.
Yeah. Just a point of order on this one. I've been fact checking here. It was Jonah and the whale. It was not a whale. It was a grouper. So I don't know if that necessarily changes.
It just means sea. No, the Hebrew word is like sea creature. It's like, that's just how Hebrew works.
Yeah,
it's like
grouper,
kind of ubiquitous, and just a fish, sea creature.
Yeah, they can get pretty big.
It doesn't matter, but yeah.
But was your point from before is like, hey, it was like, it wasn't 3 or 4 days. It was like 1 or 2 work days, 8 hours, something like that.
Yeah, the 3 days and 3 nights part. Yeah, just emphasizing like why textual criticism is important.
Yeah. Criticism of like, no, nobody's getting eaten by a fish for that long, right?
That's not
even if it is a grouper.
No. I wasn't talking about the account. I was talking about the idiom 3 days and 3 nights being like literal, or like, is it just a figure of speech of the time?
Right. I guess we could have used a different example if we're not thinking that is the grouper a metaphor then? We got the idiom of 3 days and 3 nights, but is the grouper a metaphor? We're back to this. And I think that's what the SR was saying earlier is like, it seems like we're picking and choosing which one's metaphor and which one's literal. And some of it has to be literal. So then how do you choose which is metaphor and which is literal? And there's the classic, there's no part of the Bible that says, oh, by the way, once you get to the 20th century and you have a democracy and, laws and protecting people, you can just jettison all the barbarism from the earlier parts of this book.
Yeah,
it doesn't have that interjection.
Yeah, sure. The answer to that is just called hermeneutics. It's like, I've been talking about it a little bit, but it's understanding the context of cultures at a time period, understanding, in the case of the Bible, extra biblical, literature, styles, stuff like that, languages, how languages work, their grammar, stuff like that. And then you can come to a pretty reasonable conclusion as to what's metaphorical or what's not. And
but it seems like it's like a DIY adventure, right? Sorry to interrupt, Christian, but it seems like that's kind of a DIY adventure. My interpretation is this. Your interpretation is that. Well, let's meet in the middle and murder each other, right?
Well, it's more concrete than that, I would argue. Because it's just like studying language. It's not like, it's not really hard to do if you are like well educated on it, which I'm not. I'm saying it's not impossible.
Can you name another place, another like scholarly study, another field of study where hermeneutics is one of the main ways to understand a text? Can you name any other? Because it is used in New Testament, New Testament criticism. It's often used in the history of the Bible, used whenever reading. All religious studies do this. But is there anything else you can think of that uses this particular form of this particular methodology to come to understanding? Any other field of study you can think of?
That's a good question. Not offhand, no.
Yeah. Okay. Now, here's why I say that. Here's why I say that,
Posing
Christian.
that as a problem?
No.
Okay.
No. All I want is for you. Again, I'm always this dude that gives people homework, and please, Christian, just tell me to fuck off. Like, just be like, no, dude, I got way too much stuff. I ain't doing your shit.
Well, I don't curse, so I can't do that.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
You know?
But when it comes to hermeneutics, really the number one place that it is used is when it comes to studying the Bible. That's really the number one place.
Religious studies.
So what I would love if you could figure out why other academic fields don't use this methodology. Maybe there's a reason that they don't use that methodology. I can give you an educated guess. Yeah, what do you think?
Fire.
Oh yeah, fire. It's because I think it's because the Bible is like, it's probably the most scrutinized book like in the history of the world ever. You know, so it's like, of course it would be used the most, you know, in religious studies.
But it's not about why it's used the most.
The amount of skepticism towards the Bible is like, and it's, you know, maybe warranted, sure. Like, I won't stop them. But, like, the Bible is the most scrutinized, you know, collection of books like in history.
But Christian, what I said is not that it's used the most when it comes to biblical criticism, but that pretty much no other academic field uses it. And that would be the interesting point to figure out why. Why is it only when we talk about the New Testament do we talk about criterion of embarrassment? Why don't other academic fields also use this methodology for coming to truth? My thought, my educated guess.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll be done real quick here. I'll be done real quick, and then we'll wrap up the whole show. This has been a great call, by the way, Christian. I really do appreciate this.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this.
My guess as to why hermeneutics is not regularly used in other academic fields is because the methodology itself does not have reliable conclusions. That's it.
Fair enough. I can't stop you there, but
that would be my guess. But again, that's what I would say. Go look into that and see why other academic fields don't use this methodology. Because if this methodology is really good, why in the hell are people using anything else? Why wouldn't they constantly do this if this is so good? Right?
I mean, when textual criticism involves more than hermeneutics, but no, I get what you mean though, and I'll be sure to look that up because I never thought to ask that. But in talking about the criterion of embarrassment, it's not just used out in the Bible. You know that. It's
almost exclusively used in this exact same place that hermeneutics is used. It's almost exclusively used in the exact same places. Yeah.
Almost always in the Bible because it's the most, again, the most scrutinized collection of books in history. But it's also used in like works of Confucius.
Sometimes, but it's very rarely. Criterion of embarrassment
not as much as the Bible.
Very rarely used outside of the Bible.
Yeah, not as much as the Bible. Not as much as the Bible, but it doesn't mean it's useless though. But that's good word food for thought. So.
Definitely. And please, I'd love maybe there is like some specific thing out there that honestly I just don't know, and it's just like, oh no, this doesn't work in other fields of study. Like it only works in the Bible.
But that's it is interesting to think, and I wouldn't say that just because hermeneutics is mostly used in religious studies. I don't think that means that it's like devoid of use or it is devoid of like purpose.
I would agree.
Like
I would agree.
I would just question. Yes.
I agree. It doesn't categorically rule it out, but I would definitely question as to why it is only used in this instance. Kind of like when you go over to your buddy's house and the buddy's like, hey man, you can drink anything you want, but you can't have that whiskey. You just can't drink that whiskey. Nobody's allowed to drink that whiskey. And then he goes over and pours himself a shot. And you're like, wait, this seems to be only, and he's like, oh, it's because of this thing. And like, you have to reinterpret the beer, compared to the whiskey.
I think hermeneutics is a lot more than that.
Yeah. It is. I was just being a little, I was being a little silly because we're getting,
I can I can take an educated guess and say that maybe it's, in terms of like other fields, I'm not like an expert or anything. Maybe hermeneutics is just not the right tool for the job. Just like how, like a good example would, I guess, be like doing the scientific method for like history. Like you could do that, but you can't do it for everything because you can't repeat history, right? So it's
and maybe,
you would use the
maybe
evidentiary
that
method.
maybe that is the answer, Christian. Maybe the reason that it's not used in these other fields of study is because it just like trying to use science when it comes to certain things, it just isn't the right tool. But I would just love to hear what you find. I would love to hear what you find out as the reason, because I just think this was a really, really great call, man. And yeah, we are gonna drop you. Go ahead real quick.
All right, no problem.
Nah, we
appreciate saying, good talk, and you know, I might have to call you back. So, you know.
Yeah, I think you definitely
please do. Don't forget to join the Patreon for a chance to win this as well, Christian. You could be, you probably already have one, but if you join, and we'll be announcing that soon here in a moment.
Yes, we will. Yes.
So you don't have very much time for those lucky last people who want to get involved. Now is the time to do it. I appreciate a caller like Christian. And Christian, you should call specifically us back.
Yes. Tom and I are jealous, just like God, and we want your call next time you call in. So thank you so much again, Christian. That is really, that is how I want these calls to go. I want somebody who, hey, let me throw out an idea, and then we go, well, here's kind of my thoughts, and they go, well, here's kind of my thoughts, and we hash it out and really try to get to the core of the issue. I think we did. I think that was good, man.
And we all learned in the process too.
I hope
right?
so.
Like,
I learned
you
something.
learned about hermeneutics.
That's right.
I learned about grouper.
I learned about bats. So, I mean, we've done something right today.